Start the recording.
Yes.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Lena, for joining me. I'm really excited to talk to you today about embodied learning and how that relates to the topic we've had this summer in innovative learning spaces and maker spaces, and how this is going to be our bridge or transition into the fall topics of higher impact or high impact practices. So my first question for you is, because you are an expert in this domain, if you could explain to us, what is embodied learning?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited for this interview with you. So embodied learning actually originates from embodied cognition. So that's a theory in cognitive science and philosophy of mind that proposes that the cognitive processes are not happening only here, like from the head, from the neck up, but our physical body and the interactions that the physical body has with the environment and other people are part of these cognitive processes. So you have all these traditional views that they emphasize that the brain is the central process, the central processing unit, of course. And then we have embodied cognition that suggests that all these cognitive processes happen in both levels, and they are intertwined with sensory and, of course, motor experiences. So the idea is that, as I said in the beginning, we don't learn from the head up, from the neck up, and our bodies are not brain taxis, but we learn holistically through our whole body and the movement of it, of course.
That's fantastic. I love that it's extremely based in the science. And I like that you mentioned holistic learning, because we've been talking about holistic development of our students as well. And so that's encouraging to hear, and I'm really glad to hear that, because I know that your work involves mostly business professionals and other people outside of academia as well. So
Yes.
I wanted to ask, so after we've had that great scientific definition, what does embodied learning mean to you?
To me personally, as a learning designer and also as a facilitator, as a trainer, it means joy, it means transformation, it means playfulness, innovation. I would even go into unlocking of human potential, growth. It's a beautiful way of learning, both for you as a trainer, facilitator, as a person who is with the group, but also for the people. You see the joy of them, and I love seeing them smiling, giggling, getting to know themselves better, the subject that we are teaching better, in connecting with each other, connecting with the space. Peer learning comes. All these are parts of embodied learning, and yeah, the meaning to me is really deep, and I think it's very much connected with deepening learning as well.
Oh, that's really beautiful. I love that the first thing you said was like their joy and their happiness. And I know that following what you post on LinkedIn, that certainly there are a lot of moments of joy, and people look so excited to work with you and just really happy to be in that space and try something new, and probably learn something about themselves in the process and how they learn as well.
Yeah, it's very healing. That's true. Yeah.
Now, because we focus, like the Inner Spark is focusing on higher ed, I do want to ask you some questions about embodied learning and education. So we know that a classroom can be either a space for opportunities and like a launching pad, or it can be a barrier to learning. And I was wondering, can you explain to us how to make these spaces, how to make a classroom, for example, more, we'll say, more positive for an embodied learning experience?
Yeah, I like that question. In general, I like to see things as opportunities. So I also see the classroom as an opportunity. Like the classroom itself is a room, so that doesn't have a positive or a negative connotation. What is important when it comes to embodied learning is the setting, the classroom setting. So a typical classroom setting brings up school memories, right? And when you have the school memories, people act in a certain way and they have certain expectations. So they expect frontal teaching. They expect that I'm going to tell you and you're going to listen, and this is how we're going to go about it. And now, if we encourage this type of settings, then there is no wonder why people are disengaged. Because
Mm,
this is the setting that we brought the first place, right? They
mhm.
expect you being an expert, and they expect themselves going back to their school memories, and they expect that they're gonna just sit and listen for as long as it takes until you let them go. So so that's the thing that we can interfere into the setting of the room. So one thing we can do is that we can have mobile furniture.
Mhm.
It creates spaces that they are more flexible, let's say, for learning, and create a setting that inspires innovation, inspires
Mm,
interaction, it brings playfulness, creativity. A simple way of doing it is removing all these heavy tables. Like
yeah.
chairs are a very good thing because then you can just pull them and take them, put them in the corner of the room, so you have room to move, room to, and at the same time, you can also have room to sit down and
Yeah.
to write things down and everything. But the more flexible we are with the furniture, the better it is.
Mm,
Now that's basic. And then, of course, good light helps a lot because people feel more awake, more invited.
mhm.
You need to have like certain, it's good the air to be able to, that the room
Yeah.
is air. And I think these are like fundamental things that we can do in order to embrace embodied learning and make it more, relevant for people.
So like preparing the environment for our students or for our learners.
Exactly, yes.
Awesome. Now, I wanted to ask you as well, could you explain, let's say, what is the difference, or even what is the difference to you between involvement and engagement? So we talk about embodied learning, and there's this big part of being engaged and or involved in the process. So what is the difference between the two?
Let me get my dictionary. No, let's see now. Involvement is, in the way that I see
Mhm.
it, it refers to the extent of which learners participate in the learning process. Could be passive, could be active, right?
Mm,
So the moment that somebody is in the learning process, that they are already involved, physically they
right.
are present. Now they might participate in conversations, they might raise up their hands, they might um, talk about something. That means that
Mhm.
they're involved. That doesn't mean that they are super interested, engaged, that there is emotional investment in what is happening, right? It's, for example, if we take it completely out of the training setting, just to give a
Yeah, sure.
metaphor, it's like I'm learning how to cook, and then my mom is the main chef, and then I'm next to my mom, and then I have no clue about what she's doing, why she's doing it, but she tells me, okay, pour some water and stir here and there and bring this from the fridge, and I
Yeah.
might do it. That means that I'm involved, right? I'm involved
Mhm.
in the process of cooking. That doesn't quite mean that I'm engaged, because when I'm engaged, then that goes beyond of involvement. I'm enthusiastic, I'm interested, I'm committed, I'm
Mhm.
excited. It's part of, I see it as part of my development, of my growth. I'm seeking extra information. I'm curious about it. I'm enthusiastic. So this
Yeah.
is what we want to create with embodied learning. We want to boost engagement. We want to have people, stand up and move and play things and use theater and use movement, use
Mhm.
dancing, have the music to lure them into learning, to make them curious, interested, not just, to participate, not just to go through the
Mhm.
motions, but to be completely, emotionally engaged with what is happening, because this is how we can have them closer with us, how we can
Mhm.
look into learning, but also
Absolutely.
how we can support learning retention and
Mm.
positive attitudes towards learning. We don't want people to say, oh, I'm gonna have the next training with Lena, poof, no, I don't want to go there. No, we want them to be happy, because that helps a lot. That helps everything, actually.
For sure. And so what I'm hearing is investment of
Yeah,
the learner in the material, in what's happening in the room, in the content, is a big part of being engaged, being
yeah,
invested in your learning.
exactly.
Awesome. Thank you for that differentiation. That was a really beautiful explanation. And I like the analogy of cooking I think everyone can relate to that. So very good analogy. So my next question for you is, how can higher education make spaces that embody, that embrace embodied learning practices?
Yeah, I think the part of the space itself is something that we covered right before, right?
Mhm.
So, mobile furniture helps, the light, the air, these kind of things help, and the setting in the room. I think for me, what could be a level above that could be upskilling the professors and everyone who is teaching within the higher education spaces. In the past, as you know, I worked for a couple of years with school educational, school staff, teachers, and higher education staff, and they were very excited into learning more about experiential learning, which is of course the groundwork of embodied learning, and see how they can use it, because most of the times they don't see how they can use this kind of ways or approaches to learning, because they are used to traditional ones. So that's one thing. Of course, the classrooms, as we said, and yeah, offering them with the confidence of doing it, materials perhaps that they might need. And yeah, I think these are the first things that you could do in order to make higher education, support higher education, make spaces that really embrace embodied learning principles.
Thank you. And so my next question kind of stays in this vein of, so if a college or a university were to design, we'll say, an innovative learning environment or an innovative learning space, how could they design it with users in mind? So this might, again, overlap with some of your answers from before, but feel free to expand on that, that if they were designing a new space, what considerations should they take into
Yeah.
account?
Let's first talk from a practical perspective.
Mhm.
So if you want to have people moving and using the space, you need to always think that you need approximately 2 to 3 square meters per person. So that from a
Okay.
practical perspective is very important. And then, of course, we need also to think what kind of, like, why do we use these spaces? What do we need to promote? So if we want to promote group work, group cooperative exercises, processes that people are moving, then we can equip our rooms with these kind of things, right? We need to have, sometimes you need to have room separators to make sure that people, when they are working in groups with movement, they feel that they have this little bubble that they can
Little
they can
privacy.
work.
Yeah.
Privacy, exactly. Perhaps you want to involve spaces that they are more connected to nature, that they are nature friendly, so that people have access, that the students with the teachers have access to a little forest or a yard or something, that if they want to use this kind of spaces. Then when it comes to embodied learning, you need to facilitate a lot of reflective practices, right? Because after the experience, there is a moment for reflection. So we need to have whiteboards, which I'm sure all universities have, projectors and all this kind of interactive displays to really facilitate this brainstorming, this reflection. But also I love using post-it notes and things on the walls, because then you can go move around, use these. Then, oh, sorry, my line
No,
of
it's all good.
goes back to the practical part. What I've seen that is really
Mm.
disturbing is if you have these huge parts, usually in very big buildings, you have these very big columns that are not, they're from a safety perspective are not good. So this should be prevented. It's very nice if you have like a whole big room where everybody can see each other, and yeah, and allow people to move, allow movement.
Mm. Exactly. And I think that's a big part of what you do, right, with embodied learning practices is move.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You have to get up and move. You maybe you can speak to this as well, just to speak a little more about embodied learning and what that means, that it's not something we can do, or is it something we can do while we're sitting down? Can we practice embodied learning if we're not moving?
Of course, you can always practice that. Yes, but it's not either or. I just prefer to, because when you're also sitting, you have inner movements, right? And many times, to give you an example, when I'm training managers on difficult conversations, for example, I use visualizations. You don't need to stand up for that.
Right.
You can still stay seated, but you have a lot of breath work is involved in these processes, and people are sitting, they have their eyes closed, but they are going through very deep learning processes, of course.
And that sounds like reflection in a way, right? And when people are sitting and being still and still practicing embodied learning.
Exactly. And I personally believe a lot in it, and I prefer that I call this type of practice more of a focusing practice, because if I were now to give you some theoretical backgrounds or some theoretical models, it's different if I give it to you, and it's different if I prepare you up front with a focus, with a closed eye focus, with a nice visualization, because first you need to connect with yourself and what that means to you. Let's say in my previous example, how I am when I have a difficult conversation. When this is clear, then it's much easier to connect with the subject that is being taught, because I'm already interacting with the subject.
And so it's like a priming exercise in that case, where they're getting ready and then they can engage with you afterwards, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
With me, colleagues, of course.
And their colleagues, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, those were all of my main questions. I just wondered if you had any other comments you wanted to make, or to talk about your work further, or to make any other suggestions about embodied learning practices, or how institutions, classroom teachers, anyone can go about using it. Maybe you could give us a couple examples for people who aren't familiar with what embodied learning practices could be.
Yes, of course. At first, I want to say that sometimes we think that it's something so far from us and difficult, while it is not really. And all it takes is this one moment of bravery when you actually do it. And this is all what it takes. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes. On my website, which you will put in of course, in the description, lenasmoves.com, you can find a lot of resources. So there you can hear a lot of examples on podcasts, on videos, to see how embodied learning can be applied. And that makes it easier to see how you can translate things for your own projects, for your own concepts. So that's about that. And then maybe I can give a couple of examples.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes. Do you have something specific in mind, or I can just go free?
No, just go for it.
Since we're talking about higher education institutes, maybe we can start with mathematics, because that's a project that I was doing in the past, right? So with this project, it was a 3-year project where we were teaching math teachers, but also higher education professionals, how to teach mathematics with movement. The project was called Maths in Motion, full of embodied learning, of course. And it was funded by European Union here in Europe. And one very simple example that I can share is like when you want to teach symmetry, for example. Now, the traditional way is that you put the pen and the paper and you say, okay, this is a symmetrical line, right? And then what's on the right is on the left. And this is how you teach the mirror symmetry. So a different way of approaching it, and the way that we approached and we taught the teachers to teach, is that we're creating a symmetric line on the floor. That's why you need a space, right? With paper tape, simple materials. And we had them work in pairs, and then we played some nice music, and people were standing in front of each other and they were mirroring the moves. So they had to go along this line, the symmetric line, and do mirror move. They mirrored each other's movement, and they loved it. So without saying anything about symmetry or no, you just have the students to move around. That's of course the basic of experience, the base of experiential learning, right? You have them experience it, and then slowly you start planting in the mathematic terminology, the math terminology. So you start explaining the line, the symmetry, and what you explore, what you experience, and then the student starts explaining, and they're sharing how it is for them. And then, can you guess how easy it is to put it on the paper, right? It's easy for them because they felt it, they embodied it, they understand it. They don't have, to fry their brains in order to understand it because they have it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It reminds me of, in a way, what's termed gamification, like finding ways to make learning fun, or to teach people without them realizing their learnings. Like,
I love that. Yeah.
In a way, it sounds like that.
And sometimes you have, because I never worked with students, but I always was teachers, but the teachers would always report back that the students were like, "Yo, we're just having fun, and we're not learning anything," because they associate learning with, struggling, being in that setting that we were discussing before, right? So it was pure joy for them too, and you're like, okay, it's good.
Right, exactly. So I think that's a great story to finish our conversation. So I think that I will say to anyone who watches or listens to this later that please check out Lena's website and consider, if you are an educator, consider using some embodied learning practices in your classrooms. As she said, take that leap, be brave, try that one thing and see how it turns out.
Lovely. The same for facilitators. People who facilitate in corporate settings is the same, and we have a lot of resources for these people as well. So yeah, feel free to share it.
Awesome. Thank you, Lena.
Thank you, Sarah.